I don't expect anybody to be here. I want to talk about the fear of being hurt as a way to test into the somatic for purposes of seeing where you're at with repression work. Oh gosh, I wish I could pull up my map, but you guys remember the map where the fear runs everything, the red lines. Fear of what? Right? What are we afraid of? I mean, you could say a lot of different things, a fear of being myself, fear of this or that. But when it comes down to the emotional level, it's a fear of being hurt for a lot of us. And we carry it around from childhood. It's like always there and always hidden to a certain degree. And it's connected to the repression. So if I feel like I can't express anger, that's because I'm afraid to get hurt. There's something in my past that tells me that if I express that, I'm going to get hurt, I'm going to lose people. So the fear of being hurt is a linchpin or a core program for our suffering. Again, if you look at the map, it's all there. I wish I could pull it up and show you that, like even when you're in first dimension and you see a shadow, and remember in first dimension, we can't really do shadow work. Well, unless you add shadow work into the pointing, we're just meditating, for example, in first dimension. But the fear of being hurt is very active there. For example, a shadow. So let's say what comes up is authority. Having some issue with authority, then that often is coming from anger repression. We've learned that. Right there, see, is the fear of being hurt. Because to express anger, there's the fear of getting hurt, so I won't. So by stuffing it down, then any big energy out there that represents that could be a shadow. So the authority big energy then becomes a shadow from my repression. But the repression is driven at the core with a fear of being hurt. So the reason I say that is because we can use the fear of being hurt as a way to test where we are with the repression work. Here's another way of saying it. I'll show you how to do it in a second. But if you really have done KI, you know that underneath, if you're an anger repressor, underneath the anger repression is a fear of being hurt, right? I've said that. But also if you're a hurt repressor, there's this fear underneath it of being hurt or, same thing. And people who say that they have mostly fear as a repression, because we all have fear as a repression, will often say that they're afraid of letting people see that or feeling it because of getting hurt. It's all the same thing. Or like when I was a kid, when I had to suppress the feminine side of me, it's because I was afraid of getting hurt. That's why I've suppressed it my whole life. Power, your own power, what you deny is a fear of getting hurt. So we can use this programming to discover how we're doing and where we are on the path. And I have to say a few things about that. As soon as I started to bring this path out, people were asking, how long does it take? And how do I know where I'm at? They're actually really reasonable questions. But they're also coming often from, I don't want to feel something. So it's coming from the repression. And I've been trying to help people with that when you see the seeking energy, that is the I don't want to feel something because I'm afraid to get hurt. So therefore I'm seeking awakening. I'm trying to get away from that, which is stored in my body. So we've learned in the inside out path to bring that seeking into the inquiry, as you know. But just understanding even that the seeking is coming from the fear of being hurt. Everything has that at the core. For example, deficiency stories. That might not be obvious, but why do I identify with something that I'm not unless I'm getting something out of it, right? Utility. So all my life, I believed that I was unlovable, but I did that for a reason, is because it kept me safe. That's the utility that started to show up for me when I did KI. I don't get anything out of believing I'm unlovable. Yes, the body says yes. It would say yes back then. And it would say, if I went into it, it would say, you believe that to stay safe. And then if I discovered that, it would be that you're afraid to whatever because you're afraid to get hurt. That's where it boils down to that. It's so trustable. And let me explain another way that I've been able to trust this is that the layers of anger repression left. Like, so I almost every day for about a year, I checked into my body after the anger repression work to make sure I wasn't still storing that energy. And at a certain point, I realized those layers are not there. The anger repression was not there. But I noticed, and you guys, I've shared all my process with you. You guys know all this. But then I discovered the femininity repression. And how I discovered it was through the fear, because the anger had been dealt with a lot. So there was this fear of expressing myself in that way. When you saw me come on YouTube to put makeup on, I was dealing with the fear of getting hurt again. That's what I was processing. So that was under that repression. And I was able to trust that even though the layers of the anger repression dissolved, there was still some fear there in the chronic pain area. And that was connected to femininity. So by trusting the fear of getting hurt and that it was still there, I was able to find the femininity repression. See that? So that's why I'm saying it's trustable. The bottom line is, as long as you have the somatic hit on I'm afraid to get hurt, there's going to be repression and trauma as far as I can tell. I don't want to say that's a dogma or like it's 100% true. I'd like for you guys to test it out and report back to me, but I think that we can trust that because it's such a linchpin behind everything. So then how do you bring that into the inside out path? Just do the work that you're already doing, but now and again, test into the somatic for a number of reasons. Remember that you do the somatic testing in the beginning of the inside out path to understand what's my primary repression? What am I primarily avoiding so that we can turn KI towards that? That's the inside out path. But then along the way, I've been inviting you to trust your body and do somatic testing to stay earnest, to stay authentic on the path, which means, for example, trusting your body in a trigger. And I just shared that video this week. When you're triggered and you have a deficiency story, if you'll trust your body, that sense of deficiency right there is emotional deficiency, repression. So by trusting your body and discovering that you have this feeling of lack in a trigger, it takes you back to the repression. So you can never go wrong by trusting the body. That's why I'm saying trust the body on this fear of being hurt. So that throughout the path, we come back to somatic testing. In other words, I've come back to it so much that here's how I operate now. Before I usually even get onto YouTube and share anything, I'm doing somatic testing to see if I'm landing on anything. In other words, am I saying something to either get love from you or approval or stay safe? And I'll only come on YouTube if there's no hit around it. If I'm getting a hit on something that I don't think it's clear, so I won't share that. That's how much I trust it. And that's why I feel like that what I'm sharing is authentic and earnest, because I'm trusting my body. Okay, so somebody asked, what is somatic testing? I didn't want to go all the way back to explain it, but maybe I need to. No, I really don't want to, because it involves a lot. I'll say a little bit about it. Okay, somatic testing, let me see if I can do the crash course. It would be to discover from the beginning of the inside out path that you have repression and that the repression is producing the forms of suffering in your life. So repression is producing trigger, Nick. Repression producing shadow, producing chronic pain, depression, anxiety, addiction. So then how do we get from the suffering that gets produced in our lives to the root of the suffering, the repression? That's our third dimension work, or KI. We go straight from a trigger, for example, to discerning that there's this deficiency story in it, and that deficiency story is there because we repress something from childhood. So KI takes us back to the body that's keeping the score on that repression and helps us skillfully make that repression conscious whenever we are experiencing any suffering. And basically, therefore, you're meeting your experience directly, fully, though. See, because a lot of non-dual teachings will say that you're meeting everything as it is, but here you really are, because you're unearthing the buried emotion that's behind forms of suffering. And normally that stays buried in these pointings, these teachings, but here it doesn't. So you're unearthing those repression and trauma programs as they're producing suffering in your life in real time. It's a lived inquiry. And that's somatic testing, because in the beginning, I hate to go through all this, but it's important to know that on the outside empath, Nick, we don't know. When a trigger comes up, we often don't know that it's being produced by the repression. Or if we get diagnosed by cancer, with cancer, we might not know until then that we have anger repression, for example. So the other path is fairly shocking in the sense that stuff comes up and we have to discover then what it is. But with the inside out path, we discover from the beginning what programming we're carrying on the inner body level, the hidden stuff. And then we watch how that programming manifests as suffering. And we bring inquiry to that. At the somatic level, at the trauma and repression level, that's what makes it different. It's not just inquiry into who am I, in other words. Okay, so then somatic testing happens throughout the path. Nick, if you understand that, there's a whole video, Nick, if you want to learn on, it's called somatic testing. I think I've done 2 videos. So check those out, and then you'll understand that more. But then somatic testing, that's just a fancy word of saying trust your body, is all that means. Is when you're doing inquiry, bring awareness to the inner body, because the body keeps the score on everything. So you're going to be checking into your body to see what score is being kept throughout the process. There's so many different ways that we check the body. Just trying to figure out what I want to say here. Landing throughout the path. I just did a video on it. Landing and the inside out path. Seriously huge topic in KI, landing. Because what it is we start buying into a paradigm, a practice, a perspective, a pointer that's keeping us safe. So this is when we're in the KI path and we're really transforming and healing, but we hit a big wall of fear or something. And then we land on, so some belief comes in, and it could be anything. Like mine was, it's physical. I would do all these layers of healing, and then it would be a big wall, and my mind would say, well, that's my spine. That's not emotional. Mind came in to land to keep me safe from the anger. But that's only one way that we land. We could be landing on things like, I'm never going to heal. Or there's something about me that I can't, or I'm going to get hurt. I can't do this work. I'm going to get hurt. So we just land on something, and then we're doing that for safety. But if we only stay in the mind, we don't see it. So we have to come down to the body through somatic testing to discover it. Let me see if I can give you another example. Here's a good one. Okay, the non-dual landing. So you're doing KI work and you're experiencing presence, and because that's so freeing, it might sort of take your mind over, and your mind might start buying into the non-dual insights as a way to keep you safe. So in other words, somebody says, hey, you should process maybe that deep hurt. And you might say something like, well, it's all just happening to presence. I'm just going to allow it all. Just something like that, right? Some sort of spiritual thing that we use to cover that up, to cover up that root of suffering is there. So you have to be careful with landing on stuff like that. Like, let's say you've got buried hurt, and what your mind says is, well, there's no self. Or something else might not be that. I don't think that my audience lands on that very much, frankly, but you could. And then how would you know that that is a landing and not just an insight? That's where the rubber meets the road right there. Because a lot of these landings are insights, not all of them. But some of them are real insights, and some of them are just belief systems. But they come up, and basically they just stop the process of embodying presence in some way. So how you would discover it is through somatic testing would be, I don't get anything out of believing that this is physical. I trust the body. And then, because the body keeps the score, it's going to go, yeah, you do. And then your job is to discern, what is that really saying? And mostly what you're going to find is like, I have to stay safe by believing this. There's the fear right there. So fear is running that landing. But only through somatic testing would you even know it, because the fear is so buried. So that's how you discover your landings and get back on track and stop the bypass that will want to happen here too, because your system seeks safety. Now, we get to the whole point of the video, which is somatic testing near the, I don't even want to say the word end first. I don't want to say the end of the path. Here's why. Because I don't really see this as strange. I don't see this as a path. I see this as a set of tools that help me make conscious what is unconscious. In any given moment, it's a set of tools. So like, yeah, I only use it for that reason. So for me, I don't think in terms of ends. That's another thing before I say this, is when people started asking me how long will this take or when will this end, having done the repression work, all that I was hearing was, hey, Scott, I don't want to feel this buried emotion. Tell me how quickly we can get to the place where I don't have to feel it. And so therefore I couldn't answer it that way because it was just playing into the repression. That's why I'm having you bring the seeking into inquiry. And there's a whole video on that, Nick, before you ask me. There's a whole video on that of bringing, I don't know if it's published yet. I think it is. Of when you see the seeking, let me just do a little bit of it here. When seeking comes up, just know that that's the, even if you don't see it yet, that's the I don't want to feel something, so I'm trying to escape. When it comes up, you like that. I haven't seen you here, Nick. Good to see you, unless you have a different last name. I know a lot of Nicks. So when the seeking comes up, boomerang it. Here's the thing I'm seeking, and I'm not there yet. Whatever that is, oneness. I'm not there yet. What does that mean about me? Some version of deficiency. So we know in KI that the deficiency story came because of the repression. We couldn't be ourselves. So the false self is coming in and it's seeking. So when you discover the false self, go back to your parents or your childhood and go to your primary. For example, if I'm unlovable is doing the seeking, go back to mom and dad and say, I'm lovable. I'm not going to sit with you here now, but just write it down. I'm lovable, and watch that for a while, how your system tries to prove that you're unlovable, but it's trying to prove that to keep you safe because you don't want to feel the anger or the hurt, whatever that is. So you want to go into, with your parents there, I'm not angry at them, if that's your primary, and get to the energy behind the seeking. That's the unprocessed emotion. And then if you get shut down there, increase your skill level, because it's mainly skill that keeps people from going deeper right there. Okay, so there's the seeking, and that's a crash course. I think I've done whole videos on bringing the seeking into inquiry because it's a form of suffering, just like anything else. But the somatic testing will happen at the end around the fear of being hurt. If you've done enough KI, you guys know that if you're an anger repressor, you're afraid to get hurt. I mean, the day that I discovered the program that I have to hurt myself physically with pain so that I don't hurt other people with anger or myself, was like a real program that I had. I have to hurt myself. But see, that's a bamboozle because I was willing to feel the pain in my system, but not the anger. So my system was like, okay, you can have chronic pain. That's safe enough, but not anger. That's how it works. So the fear, I also discovered the fear of being hurt, but that's with the anger. See, I was willing to be in pain. That's what I'm saying. I even had programming that said, hurt yourself physically, be in pain to protect yourself and others from the anger. But another thing that I discovered was the reason I had to be in pain is because I'd hold the anger back. I was afraid to get hurt. That's the thing. So for those of you with anger repression, sometime you're going to want to discover that that under that repression of anger is afraid to get hurt. And then underneath the repression of hurt or sadness is the same thing for many of you, is I'm afraid to be myself because I might get hurt, to cry, to express this, or power. Like, let's say your repression is power, then you're afraid that if you express your power, whatever that is, you'll get hurt. So we can trust that as a linchpin, like a very core story, to help us understand where we're at in the process. To answer this question about how long it will take, this is hard to articulate. I want to try. See, what I'm seeing is that I can't answer the question for you. How long it will take is actually completely up to you, is what I've learned. And this is how we're giving power back to people, and not giving the power to the teacher or the trainer. We're going to show you how to do the work, but we can't be the ultimate authority for your experience, because you have to trust your own experience. That's part of coming out of repression. 100% trusting your own experience. Well, that doesn't happen in the beginning, right? Because we have repression and we have fear of being hurt. But how long it will take depends on your skill level. It depends on your openness to this work. And it depends on your willingness to go in and test in the body to see how much you have left of, I'm afraid to get hurt. You can actually use that and answer the question, how long it will take, by trusting your own experience. So what people were doing is that they weren't trusting their body. And they were coming in here and asking me, without trusting their body, Scott, how long it will take. And what I was saying is, well, I don't know. How much fear do you have in your body that you're avoiding, or anger? Because if you continue to avoid that, it's going to take a long time. But if you learn the skills and you go to it, it won't take nearly as long, because you're going to the root of suffering. So, but most of it has to be answered by you, because you have a fear of being hurt. So the question is, how long will it take you to become skillful, to start making that conscious? And what takes a long time on the path is landing and sabotaging and getting stuck and stopping KI. That's what takes a long time, is where we hit a big pocket of fear or something and it stops us. And that's about the time when we will say things like, how long will it take? Not always, but sometimes. You're the only one that can answer that. I cannot answer that on the embodiment process, because it has to do with your willingness and earnestness to not only do this work, but to test into the body and be earnest about what's really in there still. I would have loved to be able to say, as I did the anger repression, I'm done now. I don't have anything else. But I trusted my body and I found the femininity repression. See? So the process has taken longer because I was more earnest. So if you're really earnest, then you're the only one that can answer that, because you discover that you still have layers through your own somatic testing, and your own practice determines whether you get to that, not me. The tools are the tools. They are what they are. What you do with them is what matters, is what I'm saying. So how do you do that if any of you are later in the path? I will tell you this. When you stop getting a hit on afraid to get hurt, is about the same time when you don't seek approval from others. It's really nice, actually. And it makes sense if you think about it. Although maybe not totally to the conscious mind, but to me it does. Because we're holding ourselves back out of fear, afraid to get hurt. We want other people's approval, right? When we have repression, we're looking for other people to say we're okay. How we're showing, we're basing how we show up on other people's reactions, a lot of it. So that's where the approval seeking comes from, is the repression. If I have to hold myself back, I have to monitor other people to make sure that I'm showing up in a way that is safe. But when you no longer have the fear to be hurt, fear of getting hurt lodged in your body, the approval seeking mechanism is quieted. There's like this really, it's not just like stories that you see, like approval, like that. There's a really low level kind of monitoring or vigilance around this, of watching other people's reactions. And that goes away. When you don't have the fear of being hurt, because the fear of being hurt is creating it. That fear is making you monitor whether you're getting the approval and staying safe from other people. So that goes away. It will be unmistakable, in other words. You're going to notice some things happening when you start seeing the fear of being hurt either going away or gone. You're going to see all those benefits of repression coming up. Like, don't really care what other people think. It's not callous and it's not negative. It's just like, I don't really care. Or I could just be myself. Like at about the same time when you start to be able to express anger and not feel shame around it, you'll probably feel in your body there's not a fear of being hurt. Or whenever you can just cry without wondering if people are judging you or show sadness, is about the same time when you won't find in your body the fear of being hurt. Or like when you start to be able to speak more. Like when we start doing repression work as anger repressors, we get a little bit of that in the beginning of being able to say stuff, and it relieves some of that pressure. But when we go deep into the work, you're just being yourself. You'll see it. You're just saying things that you'd never said before, and it feels good. It's like it feels really authentic. And about that same time, if you test into your body, you'll find that the fear of being hurt is quite diminished or gone. About that same time, when you really feel like you're living authentically. So then how do we use this? Because if we're already living authentically late in the path, don't we use that as the gauge? Like if I'm just able to be myself, isn't that all I need to know? You do have to be careful because even though you get a lot of freedom, the way that repression hides, pockets of it hide in the body, as you know. So to be really thorough, you want to test into the body. You don't just want to look at your life and say, hey, I'm doing really well, because you will be. I mean, I'm doing really well. My life is great. And if I just looked at that, I would say there's nothing else here. But if I go into my body, and that's what I did with the femininity repression, I discovered this whole other universe to explore that gave me even a greater depth of freedom. I don't want to sell myself short on that. That's why I do the somatic testing, even if life is going really well, because you can trust your body 100%. I think that's it. Let's see if you guys have anything. Does anybody have any questions? This is very rare that we get to talk for those of us who are not, if you're not in the members area. Is there anything you want to ask me about the work or anything? You're welcome. Thank you. You know, I was just saying, I get to say it to you guys now. I love the people. It's not a big group of people that do KI. I just love the fact that you guys are here. I mean, I was just thinking the other day, like if I didn't have anybody to connect with on Earth around this topic, it would be kind of lonely. But the fact that you guys keep showing up, you ask these questions that are earnest, I'm very grateful for you guys. Very, very grateful for the fact that there are other human beings like that on the Earth. And I just wanted to say that. I'm going to cry here. I feel very grateful for that. That not everybody's just looking for a way out of trauma. Some people really do want to heal it. Thanks, Nick. Okay, guys, I have nothing else. I'm not going to keep talking for no reason. Unless you have something for me. I can't see the chats. That's my problem. Oh, here it is. Oh, here's a question from Wise Eyes. Why do I rarely feel any response in my body? Is that part of the repression? Yes. So I've often said that when we start repression work, you don't, like if you repress anger, you don't feel anger. So I was just sitting there with chronic pain. It wasn't anger. For actually several weeks into the process, there was no anger, but there was contraction. So look for contraction or pain or something in the body. That's a good indicator. But sometimes people are so shut down that the body just, it's like dissociation more. We have inquiries for that. You're going to have to come into the process a little bit more and maybe work with somebody, because there's specific inquiries we can do with you around that. But if you don't feel anything in your body, yeah, that's what I would do, is I would go and work with dissociation directly. One of my green check mark facilitators, if you go work with them and say, I don't feel anything when I do this work, what they're probably going to do is inquiries. Let me get you started on it here, give you one. The work is so simple. Actually, once you hear it, you'd be like, oh yeah, I should have thought of that. The basic programming is I can't feel it in my body. It's not safe. There we go. Fear of being hurt. If I feel into it, that's the trauma. That's the past. So it's a very simple program. I can't feel into it, or I'm afraid to feel into it. You want to bring that conditioning into awareness. So that conditioning is already here. It shuts you down from feeling your inner body. It's a mind and body connection. It's not just the body doing it. The mind is involved, mind and body. So right there, when you can't feel your body, the mind is involved. The fear or the I can't feel it conditioning is right there. So you want to bring that conditioning into awareness to start out with the dissociation, which, I mean, I've worked with people like just starting with their shoulder, like their whole body is dissociated. So we start with the shoulder and we say, reverse inquiry, I can feel into this. And then they discover the conditioning. And at first it says no. But if they stay with the no and they ask, well, what does the no mean? They start seeing the conditioning that says, no, I can't, it's not safe, or whatever it says. And then as they bring that into awareness, especially with rapid fire, third dimension, I'm definitely endorsing third dimension rapid fire here. But as you start to make that conscious, you can thaw out those various areas, because there's just conditioning that says, I can't, I'm afraid to. And as you make that conscious, you bring it into awareness. That's all you have to do, is bring it into awareness. Then it starts to thaw out slowly. And then you have access to the emotions. Because obviously when you're dissociated, you don't have access to the emotion, so you're not getting a response. But as you have to stay with this for a while, like just spend every day for a while, like I can feel into this. No. Stay with that. What does the no mean? It's not safe. Whatever it says, just you want the conditioning to be seen. That's the key. So you want to bring it out, see it as much as possible, and watch your body thaw out from there, from that process. When it starts to thaw out is when you can go into some of the emotional work then. But then if you have a body that tends to dissociate, chances are when you do the emotional work, it'll shut down again. So you might have to go back into the dissociation and shut down inquiry. I've just given you a little bit of it. That's probably not enough to meet that. So I'm encouraging you to go to a green check mark facilitator and become more skillful with that. This is the first work that I've ever put into the world that has worked with dissociation. I can't tell you that I was ever really very skillful with that. It has to do with the unconscious. The conditioning is shutting you down, and you can't see it when you're dissociated. You can actually be even following non-dual teachings and not see it. I've had people come to me who they follow the teachings, and so they're like, awareness, but their body's dissociated. So they have to do a lot of body work just to be able to feel into the body. So I've worked with people who have an entirely dissociated body. And KI works. It's just a process. It takes a bit. Because you remember this, before I go, you trained like an athlete your whole life to shut down around these emotions. You perfected the art of doing that. Now you have to be in a process to undo that. It takes a while.